My name is Aster Quinn, 32 years old. 2 months ago, my mother called. With the bright, brittle voice she reserves for favors dressed as compliments. "It's going to be simple but elegant," she said, like those two words could cancel each other's price. I could hear her at the kitchen island, ceramic mug, fingernail on the rim, the small theatrics she adds when she's already decided where your money will go. She started listing the pieces: real linen napkins, paper is so, cafeteria, a local jazz trio that knows standards, repainting the fence because chipped paint photographs sad, and an archway thick with flowers that costs as much as a used car. She didn't ask for help with ideas. She asked for compliance with costs. I let her get to the true point on her own. "And Aster," she paused, as though tasting her next sentence, "please don't bring June. She doesn't fit the aesthetic." Just like that. June is 8 and loves beetles, constellations, and mixing glitter with shampoo like she's inventing the future. She wears layered outfits because more color feels like more joy, and she sports a bright pink eye patch with stars while we work on her lazy eye. I didn't ask what my mother meant. I knew exactly. June doesn't know how to be a prop. She's a person, and my mother's party required props. "How much?" I asked, skipping the theater. $2,200, she said cheerfully, as if a neat round number makes greed polite. "It'll be a family contribution." No one else was asked. I opened my banking app while she talked about champagne walls and a harpist, typed in the amount, and in the memo field wrote, "For your aesthetic." She didn't notice the sting in it. Maybe she did and decided sting looks good on me. The party landed on a bright Saturday. June and I drove to the creek instead, where the trees corrugated the sky like folded paper, where she used a net to coax frogs into a bucket so she could study their throats expand like tiny balloons. I drank gas station coffee from a cup that softened in my hand and tried not to open my phone. I caved after dark. 50 photos bloomed on my mother's profile: a rented peacock chair flanked by ferns, a champagne wall like a lacquered hive, lace draped over tables so thin a single fork could bruise them, and yes, a living, breathing harpist in a dress that looked like poured milk. In one shot, my cousin Amanda grinned, while her twins, both younger than June, smeared frosting across their own faces. Apparently, some messy children fit the aesthetic. I didn't comment. I didn't text. I put the phone face down and listened to June narrate the frog's life story, as if it required my presence to continue. Exactly 1 week later, at 8:31 a.m., Mom called with a sigh that tried to make me responsible for the oxygen in her house. "Nothing works," she said. "The power's cut. Wi-Fi's down. The pool is empty. Did you forget to pay?" She meant, of course, that for years I quietly covered gaps, last-minute electric bills, a past-due internet charge, because I believed it was temporary, because I believed in emergencies, because I believed her. But I hadn't signed up to finance a harp. "For the right aesthetic," I said, staring at the plant on my windowsill, whose soil I'd remembered to water. "Yes. For you? No." She hung up with a small, sharp laugh that wasn't humor. 20 minutes later, my phone pulsed with 5 calls from an unfamiliar number, no voicemail. On the 6th, I answered and met a voice that carried stale mahogany. "Gerald Morton, attorney for Ms. Jeanette Taylor." He always says her full name like it makes her somebody else, someone the law might like better. "Ms. Taylor," he went on, "seeks damages related to your failure to fulfill certain financial obligations to support her utilities and the resulting disruption." "What obligations?" I asked flatly, pinching the bridge of my nose like I could squeeze out disbelief. He shuffled papers the way people do when they hope their own noise will sound like evidence. "We have her signed affidavit." "I have receipts," I said. "Literal ones." I held the phone in one hand and opened my banking app with the other. A $2,200 transfer labeled, "For your aesthetic." Text requesting that money for deposits. Not a single agreement to pay the electric, internet, or to keep the pool full for photos. Silence on his end. The small kind that says he can read as well as I can. "We'll be in touch," he said, muted. I hung up and sat there with the kind of quiet that isn't peace. It's a staging area. My mother has always loved the appearance of plenty. The curated table, the flattering light, a story so smooth everyone else doubts their eyes. Plenty is an expensive costume. She tailored it with other people's credit. I pulled the gray file box from my closet, the one with old tax returns, school forms, and brittle envelopes that still smell like the rooms they were opened in. I spread everything across the table, screenshots of transfers with cheerful emojis, my note on the dishwasher I replaced from all of us after the old one flooded their kitchen, the plumber invoice I covered while Mom posted "blessed" under a photo of a charcuterie board. I printed the $2,200 transfer and the text where she banned my daughter from attending like she was erasing a typo. The table became a courtroom where only paper testified, and paper doesn't blush or deflect. It only dates itself and dares you to disagree. Out of habit, I opened the folder labeled House, Old Insurance Correspondence, Property Tax Reminders I'd forwarded because she hates portals, a brittle document whose weight felt different the moment I touched it. Inheritance Transfer, 2007. My grandfather's will. I hadn't looked at it in years. I was 19 when he died, a person with a job I called temporary, and a sense of adulthood that fit me like borrowed boots. He'd left the house to me, not my parents. Me. I'd known this as a family myth, the kind people say at holidays and never do anything about, but seeing the paper again made the air move differently. Had it ever been recorded? Filed? I flipped through a paperclip's worth of notices and found nothing. No stamp transfer, no county receipt, just the will, clear and direct as a highway sign. The idea arrived and didn't announce itself as revenge. It came as a correction. If she wanted to turn love into a ledger, then the ledger had rules, and the rules had offices with counters and clerks who didn't care how something looked in a photograph. I slid the will into a plastic sleeve and set it beside the stack of screenshots. My phone buzzed on the counter, 3 messages in a row, the first from a relative I hadn't heard from since the last time Mom needed an audience. "Are you okay?" The second, she posted something about betrayal. The third from Lauren, my cousin with the sharp memory and the reputation to match. "If you want help, I'm in. I have notes." Lauren is the family's cautionary tale. Difficult, the word given to women who refuse to be quiet while a story is being reshelved under someone else's name. Difficult women often carry maps. That night, after June fell asleep under a duvet of stickers, I scrolled and saw Mom's post. "Some people will steal from you and call it generosity. A real mother suffers in silence while her children betray her." She didn't tag me. She didn't have to. People I haven't had coffee with in a decade found their way into my messages to choose a side in a fight they didn't watch begin. I could have answered in public. I didn't. I sat with the will's crisp weight under my palm and listened to the refrigerator hum the same note it hummed before any of this. My mother likes to perform scarcity so that generosity looks like applause when she gets it. But scarcity, real scarcity, is a thing I've counted in coin jars and late-night spreadsheets. It doesn't wear flower arches. Before bed, I typed a message to Lauren. "Tomorrow, bring whatever you have." She responded with a thumbs up and a photo of a red folder on her passenger seat. Under it, she'd written, "Been waiting years, cuz." I smiled despite myself. There are people who keep their receipts because they're petty. There are people who keep them because history gets rewritten when nobody's watching. I was done watching. I tucked June's pink star patch into the little plastic dish on her dresser, kissed her temple, and stood for a minute in the doorway the way mothers do when they want to promise something they can't name yet. I couldn't promise her that family would be safe. I could promise her that our home would be. The difference felt like a door clicking shut, soft, certain, mine. When I turned off the lamp, the house didn't feel empty. It felt braced. There is a moment just before a storm when the leaves turn their pale undersides toward the wind. A small pivot that says, "We were made for this." I slid the will onto the stack of evidence, added a sticky note that read "Recorder's Office," and went to sleep with a list forming in the dark. Call Lauren. Print everything. Don't argue online. And remember, if love is going to be put on paper, then paper can love me back. Lauren showed up before noon carrying a red folder like a paramedic carries a kit. Purpose first, comfort later. She kicked the door shut with her heel and dropped the folder on my table, right where last night's evidence had congealed into small, sharp piles. She didn't hug. We were past gestures. "I brought the long version," she said, flipping the cover. "You'll want the long version." Inside, printed emails, screenshots, a photocopy of a handwritten note from Grandma, curly script, soft paper, a voice from a time when truth didn't need witnesses. Lauren had tabs, color-coded. She tapped a green one. 2 years ago, she told me her alternator died. Borrowed $600. The next week, she posted about a self-care day, steam room, eucalyptus towels. When I asked, she told Aunt Vi I was unstable. 6 months of radio silence. She moved to a blue tab. This one's Jason. $5,000 for surgery that was teeth whitening, which, fine. I like good enamel, but not with other people's money. She smiled without humor. It's not just you, Aster. She's been running the same script, one cousin at a time. The comfort I felt wasn't vindication, it was orientation. The room stopped tilting. We were in a story with a chorus now, not a solo. I slid the plastic sleeve with my grandfather's will across to her. "I think this is the hinge." She scanned, eyes flicking left, right, left, with the speed of someone who reads for blood. "You have the original?" "Yes." "You ever file it?" "No." She inhaled, slow. "Then we're going to the recorder's office." I expected some ceremonial wait to filing a will that had been waiting for 15 years. Thunder, perhaps, or the clerk pausing like she could feel a generational earthquake. The county building was fluorescent, humming, indifferent. A poster about dog licensing curled at the corners above a number dispenser. Lauren's friend, a paralegal named Sharon with kind eyes and cuticle scars, met us by the copier. "I prepped the forms," she whispered, as if paperwork could hear us. "The will is clean. No codicils, no competing claims. As long as the chain of title isn't broken, it's yours to record." At the counter, a woman in a cardigan took the documents like she takes them every day from people who need clean endings. She stamped again, slid a receipt through the slit in the plexi and said, "You'll see it in the system by tomorrow. Congratulations." The word didn't land like confetti. It landed like a key in my palm. We stepped outside into a sun too bright for fluorescent eyes, and I realized that the house my mother curated like a museum of her best angles was now legally mine. Not eventually, not in theory, now. Lauren didn't high-five me. She glanced at my face and said, "This is going to get uglier before it gets simple." "I know." "Good," she said. "Knowing is half the bruise." Back home, the mail had arrived in a white stack I didn't want. On top, an envelope with my name typed too hard. Inside, a letter from Gerald, my mother's attorney, on thick, performative paper. Damages: pool filtration system compromised, perishables spoiled, estimated at $800, reputational harm, sleep disruption, emotional distress. It read like pastiche, like he cut out phrases from an internet lawsuit kit and glued them in a circle. A second letter listed loans, a $75 Olive Garden dinner, which I paid for, $200 for emergency dental, teeth whitening, $120 for household supplies, linen napkins. She was trying to reverse engineer debt from memory's loose change. I took a photo of both letters and texted them to Lauren and Dan with a caption, "Found more fiction." Dan responded in under 5 minutes. "Keep everything. Don't engage. Drafting response." Lauren sent a single message. "She's moving from aesthetic to affidavits. Classic escalation." By dusk, the smear campaign had stretched its legs. Mom's Facebook post gathered comments like lint. Church friends I barely knew called her brave. Neighbors said prayers up. An aunt wrote, "Mothers suffer in silence," while broadcasting the suffering at 1080p. I didn't respond. I cooked pasta with June, who asked why noodles sometimes stick together. "They forget they're separate," I said, and realized I meant it. At 7:40, someone knocked. I looked through the peephole and saw no one, but the evening air had that prickle you get when a storm skirts your neighborhood. 10 minutes later, a message hit my phone from a number I didn't recognize. Check your door. I opened it to find a manila envelope leaning like a tired guest. Inside, printed screenshots of my old Venmo transactions to Mom with my own emojis circled in red as if hearts were admissions of guilt. On top, a sticky note. Everyone's watching. No signature. The smell of cheap perfume clung to the paper like a threat learned from TV. I closed the door, put the envelope in the evidence stack, and wrote a fresh label. Intimidation. October. Paper doesn't care what it's accused of. It just remembers. The next morning, a knock I couldn't ignore. 2 women from Child Protective Services with clipboards and faces trained to be both kind and impenetrable. My heart did the drop it learned during divorce court and hospital waiting rooms. They asked to come in. We received a report, the taller one said, about a potentially unstable household. June looked up from the kitchen table where we were building a solar system with construction paper and pipe cleaners. "Do you like Saturn?" she asked, holding up a lopsided ring. The shorter woman smiled despite herself. They checked the fridge, the bedroom, the bathroom, asked June if she ever felt scared. "Only when I think about the big vacuum of space," she said, then whispered, "But Mom says we're held to the ground." When they left, the taller one paused at the door. "These happen in family disputes. We can usually tell when it's retaliation." She didn't say from whom. She didn't have to. I called Dan from the sink where I was rinsing glue from my fingers. "Add it to the file," I said. "Done," he said. "Also, your deed recorded. You're on title." The words steadied me the way handrails steady stairs you've climbed your whole life. "Next step?" I asked. He didn't flinch. "Serve a notice to vacate or offer a lease with teeth. Either way, we put the terms in writing where her charm can't reach." I chose the notice, not because I wanted them on the street. I didn't. Because I needed the law to say what blood had refused to. The process server wore a windbreaker and the expression of a man who has seen enough families to stop judging any of them. He knocked at 9:15 a.m. and handed over the envelope that said, "You do not own this story anymore in the language of statutes." I didn't watch. I made oatmeal with cinnamon and sliced an apple into moons for June's lunch. The phone rang at 9:23. Dad. He's perfected absence as a personality, a benign weather system that never breaks into rain. "Is it real?" he asked, voice small, a man who had just discovered that the ground he stands on isn't ground. "It's recorded," I said. Silence lengthened into something brittle. "She never told me your grandfather left the house to you," he said finally, the admission landing like dropped porcelain. I leaned against the counter and let a life reorder itself. "You really didn't know?" "No. She said it would be ours. I assumed. He exhaled. "We can't afford to move." The words were less a plea than a map of a lifetime of not looking at the bill. "Did she tell you she called CPS?" I asked. The silence this time had weight. "She said someone from work, maybe a teacher." The report had private details no one else could know. He made a sound I've never heard him make, the sound of a man realizing complicity is not neutrality. "I'll talk to her," he said. It wasn't a promise, it was grief. Mom called that night with no lace on the knife. "You are a heartless little girl playing landlord," she said, the words picking up speed like a car on the wrong hill. "You think you're in charge now? Fine, but don't cry when you're alone." I didn't reply. I let the static fill the spaces her affection never did and hung up when the insults looped. A voicemail from Gerald arrived at 10:12 p.m. His tone softened by new facts. "My client is willing to enter a rental agreement to avoid further action." Translation. They'd read the deed. Lauren came over with takeout containers that sweated on the table. "2 paths," she said, laying it out like a map. "Evict, clean, quickish, or lease with titanium terms, and move the axis without a spectacle." I pictured June's coat hanging on the hook by a door I paid for, not begged for. "Lease," I said. "Market rate. Due on the 1st. 1 late day and it's over." "No grace?" "No grace left to give," I said, quietly and without triumph. In the morning, Dan sent a draft. 12 clauses. Clear rent, maintenance, inspections, a default paragraph that spoke in the cool voice paper has used for centuries. I forwarded it to Gerald with a one-line cover. They may stay under these terms. Otherwise, eviction proceeds. He replied in 13 minutes. Understood. At 4:02 p.m., a text from my mother arrived. Not a paragraph. Not a performance. 3 words that didn't know how to bow. We'll take it. I stared at the screen and tried to find the person I'd been when I paid a mortgage I didn't live under, when I brought dishwashers from all of us, when I sat on my hands in church basements and family rooms so she wouldn't break the room with her disappointment. She had trained me to mistake surrender for peace. But this wasn't surrender. This was terms. That night, June fell asleep on my arm while we watched a documentary about cephalopods. They can change color, she murmured, unspooling into dreams. So can people, I whispered, not sure if I meant camouflage or evolution. I went to the table, put the signed lease next to the recorded deed, and turned off the light. In the dark, paper gleamed faintly, the way a shoreline does when the tide finally changes direction. The first rent payment came in a plain white envelope, no return address. Inside was a cashier's check for $2,000, exact to the cent. No note, no apology, no flourish. Just numbers on stiff paper, cold and transactional, like they'd amputated every word that might expose feeling. I held it for a long time at the kitchen table, remembering the countless transfers I'd sent her over the years. Each one had come with emojis, cheerful texts, lines like, "Hope this helps, love you, Mom," little offerings of affection I thought might soften her grip. Now she was writing my name on checks. No hearts, no pretending. Just debt dressed as rent. I opened a new savings account that night and named it The Flip. I didn't link it to a card. I didn't touch it for bills. Every payment would go there, not because I needed it to survive, but because I needed a place where proof could stack quietly, month after month. A monument made of numbers, built on boundaries instead of guilt. By the second month, the check came even earlier. Certified mail this time, my father's signature on the slip. Tucked behind it was a receipt from a gutter repair service neatly folded. At the bottom, in my father's handwriting, a note, handled. No need to worry about it. It was the first communication I'd had from him directly in years, not filtered through Mom, not whispered at the edge of a family gathering, just his voice on paper, simple, quiet, a man who'd spent a lifetime avoiding storms suddenly sending weather reports. A week later, he called. His voice was steady but careful, like he was afraid the line might break if he leaned too hard. He told me they'd hired someone to pressure wash the driveway, that the lawn was being kept up. June is welcome anytime, he added, then paused as if bracing for my refusal. I didn't refuse. I just said, "Thank you." He sighed, a sound that carried regret, exhaustion, and maybe a shard of relief. After we hung up, I sat with the weight of it. My father, always the background figure, always silent behind her spotlight, was reaching out in the only ways he knew how. Not to apologize, not yet, but to steady a ship he'd let drift too long. Meanwhile, the ripples spread. Jason, my cousin, called after years of distance. He confessed he'd finally gotten his $5,000 back from Mom after threatening small claims court. I thought I was the only one, he admitted. Rachel, another cousin I hadn't spoken to in nearly a decade, sent me a message. You did what I never could. One by one, people began whispering their own stories, small loans, big favors, manipulation disguised as motherly charm. It turned out I wasn't the outlier. I was just the first one to slam the brakes hard enough that the whole car skidded. The smear campaign dried up as quickly as it had ignited. No more vague Facebook posts, no more cryptic texts. Silence took its place. Not peace, not forgiveness, but the hush of someone realizing their tricks no longer worked in the daylight. At home, life began to steady. June joined the local science club and came home buzzing about baking soda volcanoes and bug habitats. She started experimenting in the kitchen too, mixing flour, chocolate, and gummy bears into concoctions she insisted were desserts. We should open a shop, she declared one night, spooning her sticky creation into cupcake liners. Only if you handle the marketing, I teased, and she grinned, showing chocolate on her teeth. Sometimes I still thought about Mom's motives. I replayed the image of her clutching appearances like lifeboats. Her obsession with aesthetics wasn't just vanity, It was terror. She grew up in a house where scarcity was real, where neighbors judged you by the state of your curtains, where reputation meant survival. For her, image was oxygen. For me, it became suffocation. Understanding didn't equal forgiveness, but it explained the shape of her cruelty, the way she cut me to keep her reflection clean. Dad's silence had been its own crime, complicity painted as neutrality. And yet, in his small gestures now, I saw a man trying to step off the sidelines, even if it was too late to change the score. One evening, I walked past the file box still sitting in the corner of my dining room. The inheritance papers, the receipts, the letters, all the evidence I once needed to prove I wasn't insane. I didn't rush to put it away. I wanted it there, a reminder that truth lives best on paper, not in memories that can be bent to fit someone else's story. The house was legally mine. The rent checks were stacking in the flip. June was thriving. For the first time, the storm belonged to someone else. But I knew better than to believe it was over. Storms don't vanish. They wait. And my mother was a woman who'd built her life on waiting until someone let their guard down. So I braced myself, even in the quiet, because quiet in my family has never meant safety. It has always meant calculation. By the third month, the rhythm was almost unnerving in its precision. Another envelope, another check for $2,000, no emojis, no cursive notes, just a sterile bank slip, silence pressed between paper. But this time, something extra slid out with it, my father's handwriting on a folded receipt for lawn maintenance. Handled. Don't worry about it. 3 words that weren't an apology, but they also weren't denial. They were a man learning to communicate in maintenance logs. I placed the receipt in the same folder where I kept the deed and the lease. It wasn't evidence anymore. It was something else. Proof, maybe, that even in a fractured family, small repairs sometimes mean more than grand gestures. The rest of the family had grown quiet, too. The flood of texts and Facebook theater slowed into a trickle of wary silence. But silence is never empty. It's full of whispers you can't hear until someone brave enough speaks them out loud. Jason called again, this time less about money and more about regret. I thought I was protecting her, he admitted. When she told me you refused to help with her surgery, I believed her. I felt sorry for her. I didn't know it was teeth whitening. I should have checked. His voice cracked, not just with anger at her, but with shame at himself. Rachel's message arrived late one night. I spent years pretending she didn't do the same to me. You've given the rest of us permission to stop pretending. One by one, the cousins emerged, holding scraps of paper, old text chains, checks they'd written under pressure. Together, their stories painted a map of manipulation so wide it stopped feeling personal. It wasn't just my battle. It was the family's inheritance of silence finally splintering. At home, June's world blossomed in ways that had nothing to do with them. She joined her science club's weekend field trip and came home with a notebook full of sketches, ants tunneling in cross-section, beetles with iridescent shells. They work together, she told me, tracing her finger across her drawing. Even when they fight, they're still building. Her words stayed with me. My mother had always mistaken control for building, but building something true requires cooperation, not obedience. Nights grew colder, and I found myself sitting at the kitchen table long after June had gone to bed, staring at the growing balance in the flip. $6,000 by then. Money I hadn't asked for, money I didn't want, but money that represented a reversal. For years, I'd paid into their image. Now, every month, their image was paying me back. Sometimes I tried to imagine my mother sitting at her desk, writing my name on those checks. What did she feel in that moment? Rage? Humiliation? Or a kind of stubborn denial that let her believe she was still in control, even as the lease said otherwise? I pictured her pressing the pen down so hard the paper tore, whispering to herself that she would find a way back. Dad's voice softened each time he called. He never mentioned eviction again. Instead, he spoke about upkeep, weather, little things that needed no audience. Once he even asked about June's science club, said he thought she'd like the big oak behind the house for bug hunting. I thanked him but didn't promise anything. It was progress, but it wasn't trust. The more distance I had, the clearer I saw the architecture of my mother's cruelty. It wasn't random. It was a system, built over decades. The bans dressed as suggestions. The debts disguised as generosity. The silences sharpened into punishments. She wielded family the way some people wield contracts, To bind, not to bond. And yet, I couldn't hate her completely. That was the worst part. Understanding seeped in where anger had lived. She grew up in scarcity, in a house where appearance meant survival. In her world, chipped paint and a quiet refrigerator weren't cosmetic. They were shame. She fought it by curating, by overcompensating, by controlling. It didn't excuse the damage she did to me, to Jason, to Rachel, to all of us, but it explained the shape of her fear. One night I sat with Lauren, the red folder between us now thicker with new evidence, old letters, cousins' confessions. You know she'll never say sorry, Lauren said, sipping tea gone cold. She can't. Sorry requires surrender, and she doesn't surrender. She bargains. I don't need sorry anymore, I said, surprising myself with the truth in it. I just need space, and this. I tapped the folder, then the account statement from the flip, is space she can't invade. Lauren leaned back, smiling faintly. Then you already won. But I wasn't so sure, because victories in my family weren't final. They were pauses. And pauses, I'd learned, could be the most dangerous moments of all. By the 6th month, the pattern had become a kind of ritual. First week of the month, an envelope would arrive, sometimes certified, sometimes dropped directly in my mailbox. Always $2,000, always on time, always sterile. No handwriting except my name on the front. I deposited every one into the flip without a second thought. The balance climbed into 5 figures, a quiet monument to boundaries finally honored, even if begrudgingly. It should have felt triumphant. Instead, it felt heavy. Like each check was proof of what it had cost to get here. Family dinners reduced to contracts, affection reduced to receipts. But I reminded myself, peace doesn't always look like joy. Sometimes it looks like stillness. June thrived in that stillness. Her science club became her favorite place, and she started teaching herself to bake. The kitchen was often covered in flour and sticky experiments, but every mess felt like progress. She asked fewer and fewer questions about Grandma and Grandpa. The last time she mentioned them was in passing. Do you think Grandma ever looks at the stars, or is she too busy? And then she went back to scribbling planets on construction paper. My father kept up his cautious outreach. Each month's payment began carrying small additions. A maintenance receipt, a polite note about repairs, once even a photo of the freshly painted shutters with the caption, "All taken care of." He spoke less like a man defending territory and more like a tenant trying to stay on good terms with his landlord. When he called, the edge in his voice had dulled to resignation. Once, he even said quietly, "I should have paid more attention back then." I didn't push. He wasn't ready for full truth, but cracks had formed. Mom, however, remained silent. No calls, no cryptic posts, no sideways messages through relatives. Her silence wasn't peace, it was strategy. She was living in my house, paying me to stay there, swallowing her pride with every check. I knew her well enough to understand she was waiting. For me to falter, for me to forgive without terms, for guilt to sneak back in and open a door. But the door stayed locked. Other relatives began reaching out in whispers. A cousin I barely remembered sent me a message. She did the same thing to my mom years ago. We just never said anything. Another admitted they'd loaned her money for emergency dental work that turned out to be a spa package. Piece by piece, the mythology of my mother's sacrifices crumbled. She hadn't been carrying us all those years. She had been carrying an image, and the rest of us were footing the bill. Lauren became my closest ally in all this. What started as a folder of evidence turned into something bigger, a quiet mission. Together we began helping others in the family recognize the patterns, set boundaries, even close accounts they'd left open in Mom's name. Lauren called it generational spring cleaning. I called it survival. One night, after a long evening of sorting through paperwork for another cousin, Lauren looked at me across my kitchen table. "Do you realize what you did?" she asked. I shrugged. "I survived?" She shook her head. "No, you changed the language. In this family, everything used to be obligation and guilt. Now it's terms and boundaries. You flipped the script." I thought about it as I tucked June into bed that night. She was already half asleep, clutching a glitter-covered notebook. I kissed her forehead and whispered, "We don't rent peace, we build it." I wasn't sure if I was telling her or myself. By month 9, the flip held over $18,000. I hadn't touched a cent. I didn't know what I was saving for. Maybe nothing. Maybe everything. maybe just the proof that I could. Sometimes I drove past the house. The shutters gleamed with new paint, the lawn trimmed, the driveway spotless. From the outside, it looked perfect, just like Mom always wanted. But I knew the truth. The deed was mine, the story was mine, the power was mine. And the irony was almost cruel. For years, she drained me to keep that house looking flawless. Now she paid me to keep living inside it. The final shift came quietly. One evening, I checked the mailbox and found not just the usual cashier's check, but a handwritten note in Mom's looping script. 3 words. We're still here. Not sorry, not thank you. Just a reminder, or maybe a warning. But I didn't feel shaken. I felt steady. Because the difference now was simple. They could still be there, but only on my terms. I closed the envelope, slid it into the folder, and felt the strangest kind of peace. Not the kind born from forgiveness, not the kind born from reconciliation, but the kind you carve out with boundaries sharp enough to cut through years of manipulation. For the first time, I didn't dread the next month, the next envelope, the next call. I knew exactly what to expect. And if one day the payments stopped, if one day the silence broke into noise again, I also knew this: I wouldn't flinch. Because peace wasn't something I stumbled into. It was something I built, line by line, clause by clause, receipt by receipt. And I would never let anyone rent it out from under me again.